Hi there, it's lesson 4 of our mini course on words with multiple meanings, and we're going to focus on the word cut. Today you'll learn 20 ways to use it, from different definitions to phrasal verbs to idioms. The basic meaning of cut, which you already know, is to separate into pieces by using something sharp. So you can cut a piece of paper with scissors, you can cut hair to make it shorter, or you can cut a cake with a knife, and so on. In this case, cut is a verb describing the action of separating by using something sharp. The word cut also functions as a noun to refer to the injury you receive when your skin is separated by something sharp. You can describe a cut in your skin as a deep cut or a nasty cut if it's major, and a small cut or a minor cut if it's a little one. When you get a tiny cut from the edge of a piece of paper, that's specifically called a paper cut, and it hurts a lot for such a small cut. Getting back to cut being used as a verb, cut can also mean to reduce. This is often used with money. If a store cuts prices, it means it reduces its prices. If the government cuts taxes, it reduces taxes. If your company needs to cut costs, it means it needs to reduce the amount of money it is spending. Informally, we often use the phrasal verbs cut down and cut back to talk about reducing things other than money, especially food. If you want to be healthier, you should cut down on, reduce, sugary and fatty foods. Or maybe you're drinking too much beer and you decide to cut back, reduce the amount of beer you drink. Cut can also mean to remove or delete completely, and this is most often used when talking about text, plays, and movies or TV shows. If I'm editing an article and I see a paragraph that would be confusing to the reader, I might cut that paragraph, delete it completely. Or the producers of a movie might decide to cut a scene that doesn't contribute to the storyline. They would remove or delete that scene totally. The word cut as a noun can also mean a part of something. For example, when talking about a cut of meat, that means meat from a specific part of the animal. A few examples of different cuts of beef are ribs, tenderloin, and flank steak. There are many different cuts of meat and they vary from country to country. Another place cut means part is when talking about a cut of the profits, meaning a part or a portion of the profits. So a company that has salespeople might offer them a 10% cut of the profits in order to motivate them to make more sales. That means they would receive a 10% part or portion of the profits. One informal use of cut is to be able to manage or handle something successfully. And this is most frequently used in the negative expression saying that something doesn't cut it or can't cut it. For example, he was a pretty good student in high school, but he couldn't cut it in college, meaning he couldn't handle the college classes successfully. Or maybe there's a new employee who is not doing her work very well. She'll lose her job soon if she doesn't cut it, if she doesn't manage to do the work well. Cut can also mean to hurt someone's feelings, usually hurting someone's feelings with words or comments. If your ex-boyfriend said something really mean to you, you could say, his comment cut me deeply, meaning it hurt your feelings badly. Two more ways to express this are saying that the comment cut me to the quick or cut me to the bone. Again, those mean that the comment hurt your feelings a lot. This use also appears in the expression a cutting remark, meaning a statement that hurts feelings. So if your mother really loves you, but you tell her something like, "You've never really cared about me," that would be a cutting remark. It would hurt her feelings. Let's finish with 3 more quick and specific uses of cut. One is to cut in line. So there's a line of people waiting for something, like waiting to go on a ride at the amusement park, and if someone cuts in line, it means that instead of going to the correct place at the end of the line to wait their turn, they enter in the middle of the line, in front of other people who have been waiting longer. Cutting in line is considered rude and unacceptable behavior. If a student cuts class, it means they do not attend a class in which they are supposed to be present. Maybe a rebellious teenager would cut class in order to go shopping with her friends instead. So she's supposed to be in class, but she cuts class. She doesn't go. Finally, you'll sometimes hear the expression cut a check, which means to write or fill out a check. That's a piece of paper that you can deposit in the bank to get money. For example, if you spent some money while on a business trip and then you show your receipts to the company will often cut a check, write a check, to compensate you for those expenses. It's typically a company or business that cuts a check. If an individual person does it, we usually say write a check. All right, now let's move on to some phrasal verbs. You already learned that cut back and cut down are both used for reducing. Cut down on fast food or cut back on expenses. But there are several more. A very common one is cut off, and this has several meanings. First is the literal meaning, to separate something from something else by cutting. So you would cut tags off of new clothes or cut the top off a carrot. But cut off can also mean to turn off or stop supplying. If you don't pay your electric bill, then the company will cut off your electricity. It will turn it off or stop providing it. Or let's say there are parents who are paying for their son's college education and also giving him spending money. But the son is partying a lot and not taking his studies seriously. Then the parents might choose to cut him off, stop supplying him with money. In the context of conversation, cut someone off means to interrupt them while talking. For example, I was trying to explain the situation, but my manager kept cutting me off. He kept interrupting by talking in the middle of my explanation. The phrasal verb cut in also means to interrupt in a conversation. Maybe I'm trying to have a talk with my friend, but my little sister always tries to cut in. She tries to enter the conversation. What's the difference between cut off and cut in, meaning to interrupt? Cut in has more of the sense of entering a conversation by interrupting because the person wants to participate, they want to be included. And cut someone off has more of the sense of interrupting in order to stop another person from saying something or stop them from finishing their sentence. To cut across means to go through an area so as to make your trip shorter. For example, if you're on a bike, then instead of following the road around the park, you could cut across the park, go through it in order to get home faster. A route that is a shorter one and saves time can be called a shortcut. Now let's look at cut out. This is also used in several different ways. Cut out means to physically remove, so you can cut shapes out of paper. If you cut somebody out of your life, it means you completely stop having a relationship with them. You remove them from your life. If your parents were abusive, then you might choose to cut them out of your life by refusing to see them or have any contact with them. We also have the expression cut it out, which means stop doing that. If your kids are being loud and noisy while you're trying to read a book, you could say, cut it out. Or, if you kids don't cut it out, I'm going to send you to your rooms. And another expression is saying that you're not cut out for something or not cut out to do something. This means you don't have the type of skills or personality for that job or lifestyle. So if you feel sick when you see blood, you could say, I'm not cut out for a career in medicine. Or if you can't stand kids, you could say, I'm not cut out to be a parent. Again, it means that job or that lifestyle wouldn't suit you. You wouldn't be good at it. You wouldn't enjoy it. Okay, let's finish our lesson with some idioms. Sometimes you'll hear something being described as a cut above everything else. This means it is superior to other things in its category. Maybe there are 10 candidates for a job, but one is a cut above the rest because she has an advanced degree. She is better than, she is superior to the others. One thing you probably shouldn't do is cut corners. That means to save money or save effort by doing things in a cheaper or quicker way, which leads to a result or a product of lower quality. So maybe you're building a table for a customer and you cut corners by using the cheapest wood, but then the table is weak and it breaks easily. Or if you're writing an important article and you cut corners by just checking the facts briefly without doing detailed research, that could result in errors in the article because you cut corners. You took the easier way to save time and effort, and the result was something of inferior quality. Another common expression is to cut your losses. This describes when you've already put a lot of time, money, and effort into a project, but it's not making progress, so you decide to stop. Deciding to stop is cutting your losses. Maybe you tried to start a business and you spent $10,000 and 2 years buying supplies and advertising your products, but there aren't a lot of sales. So you cut your losses. You stop working on or investing in this failing project before you lose any more time or money. A phrase you might hear in everyday English is, "That's cutting it close." To cut it close means to do something very close to the time limit, so you're in danger of missing it. For example, if you're traveling and you have a connection, you need to get off one airplane and transfer to another one, and you only have 15 minutes to make the connection. That's cutting it close. You have very little time to get on the second plane before it leaves. What does it mean when you're talking and someone asks you to cut to the chase? That means they want you to hurry up and get to the point fast. If you cut to the chase, you don't talk about extra details and you don't do any polite introductory conversation. You just go right to the main point. Let's say your manager, who's very busy, calls a meeting of the team at work, and he starts the meeting by saying, "I'll cut to the chase. We're not getting good results and we need to improve." He didn't make any introductory comments. He didn't say a bunch of other things before. He went directly to the main point. That's what it means to cut to the chase. I try to cut to the chase in my English lessons. Get directly to the most important information that you need to know without a lot of extra stuff. Our final expression is to have your work cut out for you. This means you have a large and difficult task to do. It can be used for any task, tasks at your job, projects at school, responsibilities at home, and so on. Imagine you buy a house that's 100 years old and it's in pretty bad condition. You're planning to renovate it, to repair it and make it new, but you have your work cut out for you. That means the task is very big and challenging. I would also say you have your work cut out for you when it comes to learning all these definitions. It's not an easy task, but I hope the examples in this lesson have helped. Make sure to do the exercise so that you can practice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Hi students! In this lesson we're going to look at some combinations of letters that often lead to pronunciation mistakes. A lot of students ask me about rules, like how do we know when the letter E sounds like E versus E, or when the letter G sounds like J versus G. Well, although there are some trends in English spelling and pronunciation, there are so many complications and exceptions that I'd encourage you not to focus on remembering rules. Instead, when you learn new words, always look them up in an audio dictionary like thefreedictionary.com. Listen to the pronunciation and repeat it. Don't just try to figure it out by analyzing the spelling. I know it's frustrating. In your language, maybe there are clear rules, or maybe each letter is only pronounced one way, the same way every time. English is very irregular, so it's best to just learn the correct pronunciation of each word and not try to interpret them based on a logical system of rules. Error number 161. The first letter combination is OO. A lot of students pronounce this oo, as in food, all the time. But it's not always pronounced this way. We also have words like good. It's good, not good. It's a slightly different sound between food and good. Let's look at some words that have OO with different pronunciations. As always, repeat the words after me so you can practice. First, the easiest one, the oo sound. Food, root, pool, cartoon, proof, moon, room, school. Now the sound like good. Cook, look, wood, hood, book, hook, foot. And there's one big exception. The word door is pronounced like store and for. Door. Error number 162. Another very common letter combination that can be pronounced several different ways is OU. We have ow as in house. This is probably the most common. But it can also be pronounced O as in shoulder and as in couple. And in the words could, would, and should, it's pronounced more like Let's work on some of these words. First, with the ow pronunciation. House, loud, sound, couch, about, noun. Now with the O pronunciation. Shoulder, soul. Now pronounced like cousin, couple, double, touch, young. Now pronounced like oo, group, youth, soup, and finally pronounced like would, should, could. Actually, in these two words, OUR is pronounced like journalist, nourish. Error number 163. Related to that is the combination of letters OUGH, which is really confusing, and a lot of English learners mispronounce it. OUGH can be pronounced 5 different ways. Let's practice them. Repeat after me. First, O as in no, dough, though, although, thorough. Aw as in saw, bought, brought, ought, fought, thought. The AUGH in taught and caught is also pronounced this way. OUGH can be pronounced like in stuff, as in these words. Enough, tough, rough. There's one word where it's pronounced off, and that is the word cough. And finally, it's pronounced like oo in the word through. Error number 164. EA is another letter combination with multiple pronunciations. Do you pronounce it like an E, like an A, or what? Well, there are several different ways. First, it can be pronounced E like in see, read, see, hear, east, peach. It's pronounced like in get in these words. Bread, head, deaf, heavy, measure. It's pronounced A like in make in the words steak, great. When we have EAR, it can be pronounced ear like in clear, near, and year. But there are some exceptions. It's pronounced R like in car in the word heart. It's pronounced like in her in the words early, earn, learn, earth. It's pronounced air like in chair in the words wear, pair, swear, bear. Error number 165. A very common mistake that I've corrected for a number of students involves words like urgent, which they might pronounce with a strong U sound like urgent. But urgent and urban actually start with more of an sound, like in bird or early. Repeat after me. Early, urgent, urban. This sound is also present in these words: during, furniture, nurse, burn. Some learners assume that the letter U is always pronounced like oo as in rude or as in but in the words we practiced, the UR should sound more like Error number 166. There's a similar error with word, work, worse, and world. The letter O in these words isn't pronounced like O. Instead, WOR sounds like were. Let's practice. Word, work, worse, world. Error number 167. The final mistake we'll cover in this lesson has to do with what I like to call the invisible Y sound. Some English learners pronounce this word like music instead of music. Can you hear the difference? It also happens with uniform. Don't say uniform, say uniform. The letter U should be pronounced like U, not just oo. Here are some more examples for you to listen and repeat. University, community, continue, issue, reunion, distribute, regular, huge, cute, use, fuel, human. How can you tell when to say you instead of oo? Again, there's no way to know just by looking at the word or analyzing the spelling. The best way is to look up the word in a dictionary that includes audio so that you can listen to it and learn the right sound. Thanks for practicing with me. Now you can move on to the next lesson, where we're going to work on pronouncing words with tricky spellings. This was a free sample from our new course all about 200 common errors in English. If you want to get more lessons like this one and learn how to fix mistakes in grammar, vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation, and more, click on the link in the video or in the description to learn more and join the 200 Common Errors course.
Language enables us to express our thoughts, ideas and feelings to others and also to understand theirs. Linguistics is the scientific study of this rich and varied human ability. It seeks, among others, to answer a number of fundamental questions. For example, what is the nature of language? And then, of course, in this e-lecture, what is linguistics? And finally, why should one study linguistics? In this introductory e-lecture, we first define the term language and then discuss the major branches of linguistics. Since in most cases linguistics is a new subject to students, a number of aspects in favor of studying linguistics will also be included. Let's look at language first. Here is a definition of language that contains a number of keywords that allow us to approach the topic in a suitable way. Language is the institution whereby humans communicate and interact with each other by means of habitually used oral, auditory, arbitrary symbols. Published by Richard Hall in 1968. Let's look at these keywords in more detail. Language is confined to humans. Animals certainly communicate with one another. However, all animal communication systems lack the ability to communicate about anything beyond the here and now. And they do not allow novel messages to be produced and understood. So language is confined to humans in a strict sense. Let us move on to the next keyword. Communication and interaction. Certainly, animals communicate and interact, yet the communication systems humans use is certainly more complex than that of animals. Just look at the examples of animal communication in the VLC e-learning unit, Language and Linguistics. Well, next, language is used habitually. People use language everywhere, every day, usually with little cognitive effort. Words and sentences seem to flow out of the mouth in a subconscious, almost automatic way. Or do you normally think about each word you utter? Look at this man. These words just flow out of his mouth. Furthermore, language is used oral auditorily. The oral auditory channel, that is communication via the mouth and the ear, is the most important mode of human communication, and English has reserved a special label for it, namely speech. Finally, language makes use of arbitrary symbols. There is no obvious relationship between the linguistic sign, that is the word or the sound shape, and the object in the real world. So here we have the object table. Now, why is it table in English, Tisch in German, something else in Chinese, Stol in Russian? There is certainly no direct relationship between the linguistic symbol, the word, and the real life object. Let us now see how linguists study language. Now, first of all, linguistics is the scientific study of language. That's the definition of the field. And it can be subdivided into three main branches. The first branch has to do with everything that is concerned with sound. Speech sounds, the sounds of speech in general, or the sound elements in particular languages. Then we have a second big branch which deals with structure. This could be the structure of words, the structure of sentences, and something in between, the structure of phrases, for example. And finally, we have to look at the meaning of what is being said, the meaning of words, the meaning of sentences, and the meaning of even longer stretches of speech, such as utterances and conversation. Let us look at the branches in more detail. Now, the branch of sound has two sub-branches, namely phonetics and phonology. Phonetics studies human speech sounds in general from various angles. For example, these two sounds here, which are represented in these angular brackets, the first one would be something like this one, and the second one So produced once and, or in a vocalic environment, a and a. Now the question is, are these real speech sounds? Are they used in any language? How are they produced? How are they perceived? How can they be analyzed acoustically? These are some goals of phonetics, the study of human speech. Now we can also ask the question about the principles governing the sound systems of particular languages, and this branch is referred to as phonology. For example, we could ask the question, is something like this in English, here is the English flag, is something like big a possible word in English? Well, we all know it is not, and obviously here are some principles at work that we have to define. By contrast, this word here, frisch, so this one is out, but frisch by contrast could well be an English word, however it doesn't exist. In many languages, words are not indivisible but are composed of smaller units. So here we have the word nationalization, and you know it consists of at least 4 parts. Now the field that deals with phenomena of this kind is referred to as morphology. It seeks to define how words are built from these smaller units and what are the component parts of words such as these. Syntax, the next branch, is the study of sentence structure. For many linguists, this is the core area of linguistics, leading to most fundamental insights about natural language. For example, one could ask the question, is the sentence "colorless green ideas sleep furiously" a sentence that has been used quite often in linguistics? Is this sentence grammatical or not? I'm not giving the answer here. Let's look at the next branch, the branch that deals with meaning. And here, of course, in this big branch, we could look at the meaning of words or sentences in the branch referred to as semantics. So interesting questions could on the one hand be, what is the relationship between items such as wide and narrow? It is certainly different from the relationship between the 2 items tulip and flower. Or we could ask about sentences such as, Mary failed her exam even though she didn't work at all. Well, what a strange world this is. The logic behind such a sentence is discussed under the heading of sentence semantics. Now, pragmatics is an even wider area, it is the branch of linguistics that studies the use of language and its effects. It is concerned with the meanings that sentences have in particular contexts in which they are uttered. What do you think about this sentence? I'll come to your party. Well, depending on the relationship between me and you, it could be a promise, or if you'd rather dispense with my presence, it could be a warning. I'll leave it up to you. Now, having an idea about the object of study, namely language and the branches of linguistics, a fundamental question remains to be solved. Why the hell should you study linguistics? Couldn't you say, my mother tongue is English, German, Dutch, or whatever? Doesn't that suffice? Isn't that good enough? Well, let's find out the answer to this question. I will give you 6 examples which should motivate you to study linguistics. More examples can be found on the Virtual Linguistics Campus. Here is the first question, which can be referred to under the heading of language awareness. Do native speakers, those speakers who claim to know a language, often know enough about their language? What do Germans say when they want to translate the word cheese into German? Do they say Käse or Käse? Well, linguists will tell you why they have the choice and on what sort of principles this choice can be based. What about the English word ain't? Well, Is it a colloquial, a standard feature of English or not? Is it confined to particular regions? Well, these are questions of language awareness. Another interesting question deals with language impairment. What happens when the use of language is impaired? Well, you would certainly consult someone who can apply remedial methods. Aha! A linguist, a speech therapist with a profound linguistic background. So here linguistics comes into action. And then if you look at computers, for example. Now, why can't computers use language as we do? They work really well. Machine translation programs, speech analysis programs, and so on. Nevertheless, they haven't yet reached the standard of human language capability. And this is probably due to the fact that they work differently as compared with the human brain, and maybe they do not know enough about language. They can store a lot, they can do a lot, but they do not really understand what is being said. Linguistic research may help out here. And what about children? How do children manage to learn a language so easily? Do they perhaps imitate their parents? That would not be very good, because parents and near relatives often use a sort of special baby talk. They round their lips when they start to speak, for example. Still, children acquire their native tongue. Well, language acquisition is an important linguistic subfield that seeks to find out the main principles of this process. And, believe it or not, linguistics is really important when it comes to the analysis of literature. Shakespeare, for example, used a type of English which is completely different from ours today. Well, when did he live? 1564 to 1618. Wasn't the English different then? Yes, of course it was. And there were so many elements in English that can hardly be understood today. Linguists tell you which ones. Well, and finally, language teaching. Is linguistics important for the teaching of a foreign language? Oh, yes, it is. In order to teach a language properly, you should not only know the language, but you should also know its structure. You should know about a language. It is just like with a clinical surgeon. Medicals must have a precise idea about the structure of the human body, just like teachers should know the structure of the language they teach. Linguistics and linguists will tell them. Are you convinced now? I hope you are. Well, over and above all these aspects, I think linguistics is simply a fascinating and interesting scientific discipline. Join us on the Virtual Linguistics Campus, become a member of the VLC community, and enjoy the fascination of language study. Thank you.
Bonjour and welcome to the Free Language Web Tour on how to learn French online. My name is Tim and I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of some of the best resources out there for learning French quickly, efficiently, and hopefully without spending too much money or any money at all. Let's start with free language. Allons-y. We have the Learn section, go down to French, and then you will have a whole page full of resources. We've scoured the net and we've brought together the ones which we think are probably the most enjoyable and most effective ways to learn. So here we have French language resources, we have a whole list of different podcasts, the news in French, and French internet TV links as well. There's loads and loads of tools, so just go to freelanguage.org/French and you'll find them all there. There are two other websites which bring together lots of resources to learn French online for free. One of them is by a guy called Jim Becker, and Jim brings together literally hundreds of links for French quizzes and tests and verb tables, all kinds of resources. There's a lot there, so you just need to spend some time looking through the different sites and seeing which ones you prefer, but trust me, there's no shortage. Another one which you might like is Mindsight. Mindsight brings together a whole load of resources, most of which are free. Let me read a little bit from their text. It says, many include a range of multimedia elements such as video, audio and flash animation. They have something for everyone, for absolute beginners to French to the more advanced student. There is one site in particular that they recommend which we think stands out. So we're going to go and have a look at that in more detail. This is the Learn French site from the University of Texas. It's pretty good. Let's go and have a look. The University of Texas have put together a really comprehensive package for learning French online for free. They have a complete overview of all the major grammar points, as well as some little cartoon characters in there and a little storyline that develops to make it more entertaining as you go along. And at the end of each grammar point, you have an exercise to put it into practice and make sure you've understood everything correctly. One of the best parts about the Texas website is the fact that it's very, very interactive and it's very visual. They have a complete course that you can follow. Just go to this URL here and you'll see just what's on offer. They take you through various different themes and different areas of vocabulary, and for each one have videos of native speakers putting it into practice, and also different grammar points are covered each time. So for example, if we go to the Bon Appetit food section, it starts with the vocabulary, then you have a little bit of phonetic work, you have grammar points covered, and then they're all heard and seen in actual context with French speakers speaking, for example, at a fruit market, or maybe American students putting it into practice as they travel the world. Incredible amount of resources here, completely free, and there's also a lot of activities and follow-up links. It's a complete package. It's pretty wonderful. Another service out there with a whole load of material for free is the freepod.com service. When you get to their homepage, just go down to the bottom and click down here on your create free account link. Once you've done that, you choose your level and you will be presented with lots of different options for looking at materials. So you can listen to a whole load of different podcasts. There are tools to improve your French pronunciation, your French grammar, and this is a service which is also available on your iPod or your mobile device, so you can study on the move. What we particularly like about these guys, not only do they offer a whole big database of podcasts that you can access with accompanying exercises, but they also present all of this material in a really fun and enjoyable fashion. So when they sound like they're having so much fun teaching, it helps you to learn in a fun way as well, and it's kind of infectious. Just have a listen. They're always laughing and having a good time, and it kind of helps you to enjoy the learning experience too. So let's have a look. What have we got? We've got a lesson here where you listen to a conversation and then you can have a look at the transcript. There are accompanying exercises and expansion links. There's always the possibility also to talk to people about what you've been learning in a forum. Fantastic service. The majority of it is free, but there's also a subscription option if you do want to go ahead with that and really get the full package. If you're watching this in YouTube, there's a link down in the info box where you can click and have a look at that. And if you're watching this on the freelanguage.org site, then there is a link below. So let's move on. Allons-y. A great way to improve your listening skills is to listen to French radio as often as possible. There are lots of different ways to do this online. One way to do it is to go to the Radio France site, and they bring together a whole load of different stations. So we have France Inter, which is general chit-chat, France Info, which is news reports, then we have France Bleu, France Culture, France Musique, and so on, depending on what kind of vocabulary you want to hear and what kind of subject matter interests you. Another possibility is to go to the rfi.fr site. They have a different take on things. They bring together reports and news from all around the world and from French-speaking countries other than just France. So they have Quebec, for example, and French-speaking countries in Africa. Really interesting reports. If you go to the site listenlive.eu/France, they give you a long list of different possibilities. So there's really no limit to how many different stations you can listen to, and I'm sure you'll find at least one which is to your liking. BBC, what do they offer? Well, they are a fantastic hub for bringing together lots of different resources. They have different news resources, different French channels. They also have BBC programs made by the BBC. They're accompanied by transcripts. So you can actually watch the programs time and time again if need be, and follow them with transcripts. And there are also regular series which are updated, and basically you're always guaranteed to find fresh material. There's also the possibility through the BBC website of finding online programs. So here we have TV5, which brings together reports from all around the world. You can watch that on your computer screen, as well as various different comedy programs and French weather forecasts, all kinds of different things brought to you through the BBC website. Have a look at that if you have time. Another website which is fantastic for learning French is the France 24 website. They have news in two versions, English and in French. So you can read the French and then follow it up, check your comprehension by looking at the English version. And you can do the same thing with the streaming news. You can watch the news in French and then English, or vice versa. Fantastic way to learn and absolutely free. Here are a couple of sites for visual learners, or they could be useful for teaching French to kids, or maybe to big kids. Adults who don't want to trawl through grammar exercises and would prefer to learn using some online games and activities. If you go to Lexique FLE, these guys have lots of different activities, all of them beautifully presented, and you can either do them online or download them onto your PC or your Mac. Let's have a look at an example. Train vocabulary. Here you have a dialogue. You can listen to it, practice the pronunciation, and follow it up with some exercises. Lots and lots of material there. Again, another site that offers lots of visual games and activities, hello-world.com. So you have to pay for some of their resources, but there's also a lot free if you go to this URL here. Let's have a look at one of them. This is the weather, and again, as I said, very visual, very interactive. Lots of fun, and for kids and big kids. So I hope that the information on this web tour was useful to you, and if you need any more advice, tips, links, resources, you can go to freelanguage.org, go to the Learn section and French, and you'll find a whole load of other materials there. And there's also on the homepage of freelanguage.org a video on how to learn languages online for free. We recently produced this, and there's lots of good ideas in there. So, bonne continuation, bonne chance, and enjoy your French learning experience. À la prochaine!
So, before this video I made a video giving some background about the ancient history of the Middle East, but to briefly recap, Sumerian, Akkadian, Assyrian, Babylonian, Aramaic. Good? Okay, so last we left off, the land of Israel had just been conquered by the Neo-Babylonian Empire, and there was a really large community of Jewish people who had been exiled from Israel and were living all across the empire, particularly in the city of Babylon. Depending on what you are and aren't willing to believe as a valid source of history, we may or may not know all that much about the Jewish people before this point, which is why I'm starting the video here. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, like the Neo-Assyrian Empire before it, mostly spoke Aramaic, so although the Babylonian Jews continued to use their ancestral language of Hebrew for liturgical purposes and to to record theological texts like the Hebrew Bible, they gradually started speaking Aramaic in everyday life, and this marks the beginning of a long trend of Jewish people picking up the language of the land they're living in while still holding on to ancient Hebrew. This is also the first time the Jews really needed to define themselves as a people. Before, they all lived in the same place and spoke the same language, but now they lived all over the place, mixed in with plenty of non-Jews, and usually spoke the same language as everyone else. So this was a defining moment for the Jewish people, the moment when they first had to firmly establish who is and isn't a Jew. Because so many people spoke Aramaic as their native language at this pivotal moment of Jewish history, Aramaic would go on to become a sort of Jewish ancestral language alongside Hebrew. Anyway, in 539 BC, the Persians under Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, and since a lot of their new empire incorporated former Babylonian territory that used Aramaic, they decided to pick up Aramaic as an official language. Cyrus had led the Jewish people to return to Israel and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, earning him an honored place in Judaism and making him the only non-Jew to be called Messiah. So the Jews went back to their homeland, but when they got there, they didn't suddenly start speaking Hebrew again. They actually continued to use Aramaic in everyday life while using Hebrew for religious and scholarly purposes, just as they had in Babylon. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great conquered the entire Persian Empire and spread the Greek philosophical ideas of Socrates, Plato, and especially Aristotle over the entire region. Alexander's empire fractured into a number of small kingdoms after his death, which became known as the Hellenistic kingdoms, one of which, the Seleucid Empire, would stay in control of Israel. But the ideas that Alexander the Great spread would stay in all of these places and had a lasting effect on all of the people he conquered, including the Jews. Many Jews, especially those who had migrated to the Ptolemaic kingdom, another Hellenistic kingdom that controlled Egypt and parts of Anatolia, sought to combine traditional Jewish theology with Greek philosophical ideas, a movement known as Hellenistic Judaism. Linguistically, the Hellenistic Jews spoke a dialect of Greek known as Koine Greek, which was a lingua franca of most of the Hellenistic kingdoms, and they're most famous for translating the Hebrew Bible into this dialect of Greek in a translation known as the Septuagint. Because they wrote down so much, we can actually tell that the version of Koine Greek that the Hellenistic Jews spoke was a little bit different from the version that everyone else spoke. Not too much, just some minor differences in syntax that would have made Greek easier for someone whose native language was a Semitic language. And sometimes it wasn't even there at all. Sometimes they did use perfect standard Koine Greek grammar, particularly if they were writing for a non-Jewish audience. It seems kind of small and unimportant, but the Jewish people adopting the language of the people they're living with and then modifying it in small ways to be more like Hebrew and Aramaic is going to be another big running theme of this video. Israel eventually rebelled against the Seleucid Empire and formed its own kingdom under the Hasmonean dynasty called the Hasmonean Kingdom, but only about 50 years after its independence it began to be plagued by civil war, and during this civil war the Romans invaded and took over in 63 BC. About 80 years after that was when Christianity was founded, but that is not what this video is about, so I'm not getting into it. As one might expect by now, the Jews eventually revolted against the Romans. 3 times, actually. The first time was between 63 and 73 AD, and although the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, and although the Romans ransacked and burned the entire city of Jerusalem, and although a lot of Jews were exiled or sold into slavery, a lot of Jews still stayed in Israel. The second time they revolted was the Kitos War from 115 to 117, but it was fought mostly in the Jewish diaspora across the Roman Empire, particularly in Libya. It was only after the Bar Kokhba revolt from 132 to 136 that the last of the Jews in Israel were either killed, exiled, or sold into slavery. Following the Bar Kokhba revolt, Jews are usually divided into 2 groups based on where they migrated afterwards, the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardi Jews. Linguistically, pretty similar things happened to both of these communities. There had probably been a few Jews who had migrated to some new place centuries ago, possibly as long ago as the original Babylonian exile, and when those first immigrants got there, they learned and started speaking the language of the people they had just moved in with. But then, as more and more Jews started moving in, particularly after the Bar Kokhba revolt, the Jews in the region formed their own comparatively insular community, and since a lot of the Jews who were moving in spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, the dialects these people spoke wound up being fundamentally the same as everyone else in the region, but with a lot of loanwords from Hebrew and Aramaic, especially for religious ideas. As time went on, because the Jewish communities tended to isolate themselves from non-Jews a fair amount, their dialect slowly drifted from the dialect of the rest of the region, as both evolved in different directions over the centuries. The first place this happened was the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain and Portugal. The Jews who moved here became known as the Sephardi Jews, and to this day a lot of Jews descended from Jewish migrants from the area still speak a language sometimes called Judeo-Spanish, sometimes called Judesmo, and sometimes called Ladino. The language is really similar to modern-day Spanish, but you can also see how similar it is to other Romance languages of the Iberian Peninsula, like Portuguese, Catalan, and Aragonese. The vast majority of Sephardi Jews were exiled from Spain during the Inquisition, so most of them are, more recently, from the lands they fled to, including Muslim areas in southern Europe, where their language picked up a fair amount of vocabulary from Arabic, Turkish, Greek, and various Slavic languages. The other group, the Ashkenazi Jews, developed a language that, next to Hebrew, is probably the most well-known as a Jewish language. Yiddish. This language is descended from Middle High German, but it also has a fair amount of influence from Old Italian, Old French, and Old Slavic languages, probably because a lot of Jewish immigrants to Germany around this time went through France, Italy, and Southern Europe to get there and had to learn those languages in between. From Germany, a lot of Ashkenazi Jews migrated into Eastern Europe, so Yiddish became widespread among the Jews in these areas too. Now, those two languages are the most famous of the modern Jewish languages, but there are other groups of Jews who migrated to other places, the biggest of which would be the Mizrahi Jews, a bit of a catch-all term for Jews who have historically lived in the Middle East and North Africa. These Jews also often spoke their own dialect, different from their neighbors, but it was usually just barely its own dialect, not different enough for anyone to ever really call it its own language, like Judeo-Spanish or Yiddish. Usually these are dialects of Arabic, like Judeo-Iraqi Arabic or Judeo-Yemeni Arabic. Many of these Jewish languages are currently dwindling into extinction. The hardest group hit by the Holocaust was the Ashkenazi Jews. Of the 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust, 5 million spoke Yiddish, reducing the world population of Yiddish speakers from 12 million to about 7 million. Alright, so I'm really worried that I won't be able to deal with topics involving a lot of violence in the recent past with the reverence they deserve, so how about we move on to the next period of Jewish history? How was I supposed to know that Israel would invade the Gaza Strip right after I started working on these videos? Okay, guys, I know a lot of us have really strong opinions about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I know I'm struggling to not just turn this whole video into one big rant on the topic. But even though this might not be the best time to ask this, I would really appreciate it if we could try to put our disagreements aside just for a minute and appreciate the fact that something really, really interesting has happened here linguistically. That thing being, Hebrew is a thing again! I mean, yeah, Hebrew had been preserved by Jews this whole time and used in religious writings, but no one had ever actually spoken it in everyday life since the Babylonian exile. During the Zionist movement, as millions of Jews started migrating to Ottoman Palestine during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the language that wound up becoming the lingua franca of all of these new people all over the world was Hebrew. And this wasn't just because Hebrew was the only language they all had in common, so of course they started using it to communicate. They could have just as easily used Arabic, the language of the people who already lived there, or Yiddish, the most widespread modern Jewish language, or hell, it would have been just as easy to bring back Aramaic. But no, they brought back Hebrew, and they did it mostly because a lot of them believed that Hebrew was the best language for the Jewish people to speak when they returned to Israel. As Hebrew became the dominant language of the region, millions of people started growing up with it as children, creating a whole new generation of native Hebrew speakers. So Hebrew went from having 0 native speakers for 1,500 years to having about 5 million native speakers today. That is freaking unheard of! To give you some perspective, the number of times people have taken a completely dead language with no native speakers and created a community of people of any size made up mostly of native speakers of that language is exactly 1. This is the only time anything like this has happened ever anywhere. And yeah, modern Hebrew is really, really different from ancient Hebrew. In fact, grammatically, it might actually be more similar to Yiddish, but you know what? It still counts. A lot of people today want to do similar things, like getting everyone to speak Esperanto or Lojban or revive Proto-Indo-European. And although those languages becoming widespread in modern times is pretty seriously unlikely, at least in the near future, the example of Hebrew shows us that if enough people really want to make it happen, it can be done. Language usually changes and evolves according to its own rules and laws, almost as if it's changing completely on its own. But Hebrew reminds us that language is still a thing people do, and if enough of us want to, we can do it however we want. Catch me later for more linguistics videos.
So now it's arrived! Up, live, long, forge!
Oh, and one more thing, just a quick message that in all likelihood few people will understand and no one will care about. To people who are, like me, enthusiasts of a particular TV show about a particular group of 6 colorful equines and will be attending a certain large gathering that will be held in Baltimore this weekend, you may wish to know that I will not be attending, but Fancy Pants will.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Where are you arriving from?
I am from London.
What's the purpose of your visit?
Business. I'm here for a conference.
How long are you staying in the US?
A week.
Where are you staying in?
In San Francisco at the Pacific View Hotel.
Do you know anybody here?
Yes. Mark Ryder.
Is the family or a friend?
He's a colleague and a friend.
Do you have his phone number?
Yes, his mobile is 4056557182.
Is this your first visit to the US?
Yes, it is.
Enjoy your stay in San Francisco. Thank you, Allie.
Hi.
Hi, Mark.
You look great.
You, too. How are you?
I'm fine. How was the flight?
Long. 11 hours.
Oh, you must be really tired.
Yes. I couldn't sleep at all. What's the time here? I need to change my watch.
7 o'clock in the morning.
It's 3 o'clock in the morning for me.
Okay, I'm gonna take you right to the hotel and you could rest.
Fine.
You are gonna love San Francisco. I'm so pleased you came.
Me too. It's great to see you again.
Good morning, Mom. How can I help you?
Good morning. I have a reservation. My name's Ali Gray. I'm here for the MTC conference.
Up here it is Miss Gray. For 6 nights?
That's right.
Okay, Miss Gray. Here's your key. You're in room 419 on the 4th floor.
Thank you. What time's breakfast?
From 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock in the Pavilion Restaurant on the 6th floor.
Thanks. Where's the lift?
The elevators are over there.
Thanks.
Do you need any help with your bag?
Yes, please.
Hello. Reception.
Hello, this is room 419.
How can I help you?
I have a problem with the air conditioning. It isn't working and it's very hot in my room.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll send someone out to look at it right now.
Thank you.
Room server. How can I help you?
Hello, this is room 419. Can I have a tuna sandwich, please?
Whole wheat or white bread?
Whole wheat, please.
With or without milk?
Without.
French fries or salad?
Salad, please.
Anything drink?
Yes,
With
a
ice and
Diet
lemon?
Coke. Justice.
Yours be there in 5 minutes, Mom.
Thank you.
Here you go, Ali. A cappuccino Caesar remembered.
Well done. Thanks.
Did you sleep well?
Yes, very well.
How are things?
They're fine. What are the plans for the week?
Well, today we don't have any free time. But tomorrow I'm going to take you to this great little restaurant.
Oh, that sounds good.
And then on Wednesday night, there's a cocktail party here at the hotel. And then a conference dinner on Thursday. Is there anything special you want to do?
Well, I'd like to see the bay and the Golden Gate Bridge. And I'd like to go shopping this time.
Hi Mark, how are you doing?
Hi, Brad, I'm fine, just fine.
Aren't you going to introduce me?
Oh sure. Ali, this is Brad Martin. Brad works in Los Angeles office. Brad, this is Ali Gray from the London office.
Hello.
Hi Ali. Great to meet you. Mark told me you were very nice. But he didn't tell me you were so beautiful. So, is this your first time in San Francisco?
Yes, it is.
Ali, it's time to go. Excuse, Brad.
Well, great to meet you, Ali. I'll see you around.
Yes, nice to meet you, too.
Are you ready to order?
Yes, to start a tomato and mozzarella salad. Is that right now?
Yes.
And the mushroom soup for me.
And for your main course?
I'll have the fried chicken.
With French fries or a baked potato?
A baked potato, please.
And for you, sir?
And I'd like the steak with French fries.
How do you like your steak? Rare, medium, well done.
Rare, please.
And to drink?
Could you bring us the wine list, please?
Chicken for you, ma'am. And steak for you, sir?
I'm sorry, but I asked for a baked potato, not fries.
No problem. I'll change it.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
I asked for my steak rare and this is well done.
I'm very sorry. I'll send it back to the kitchen.
Could we have the check, please?
Yes, sir. Your check.
Excuse me. I think there's a mistake in the check. We only had 2 glasses of wine, not a bottle.
Yes, you're right. I'm very sorry. It's not my day today.
Thank you, Mark, that was a lovely dinner.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
How's your daughter?
Jennifer. She's fine. She's with her mother in Los Angeles.
Can I ask you something personal?
Sure, what?
How long were you married?
3 years.
Why did you break up?
There were a lot of reasons. We were very young when we had Jennifer. We were both working very hard. We didn't spend much time together. The usual story. What about you, Ali?
Well, there was someone. I met him when I was at university. We were together for 2 years. We broke up.
Why?
I don't know. Usual story.
Not too soon. I will take you to the hotel.
Linguists often make a distinction between 2 ways of thinking: linguistic descriptivism, where you just try to describe how people talk, and linguistic prescriptivism, where you try to prescribe how they should talk. Linguists can be kind of insecure about their status as scientists, so they tend to shun linguistic prescriptivism. And my last big video is part of a long tradition of pointing out how a lot of linguistic prescriptivism is just the result of ignorance and prejudice between linguistic groups. But it's worth mentioning that there are completely valid reasons to say that people should speak one way and not another. Like, if you're in a German class, then it makes perfect sense to say that this should be pronounced Deutsch. Or if you're writing an academic paper, then it's perfectly reasonable to say that you shouldn't say ain't. These are both examples of people trying to sound like other people for one reason or another, but sometimes people have argued that we should start speaking in a way that no one currently does. And in its most extreme form, this eventually leads to the topic of this video: people making up completely new languages. There are 2 main reasons people have done this. The first is that people get sick of having to learn lots of languages in order to communicate with lots of groups of people, and start wondering, what if we all just learned one language and communicated in that? Such a language is called an auxiliary language, and in practice, this usually happens with the language of the dominant political power at the time, like French around 1800 or English today. But the problem with using languages that a lot of people already speak natively is that it's unfair to the people who didn't grow up with it. Like, why should almost the entire world have to learn English while the Americans and Brits get to just keep using the language they already know? So another solution to the problem is to create an artificial auxiliary language, one that would be equally hard for everyone to learn. The first really popular artificial auxiliary language was Volapük, created around 1880 by Johann Schleyer, and to gain some serious ground in the 1880s. This might have been a time of rising nationalism across Europe, but it was also a time of reaction against that nationalism, and to a lot of people, Volapük seemed like a symbol of universal brotherhood. At its height, there were hundreds of Volapük clubs across the world. In 1889, at the Third International Volapük Conference, the proceedings were held entirely in Volapük, but after that, things started going downhill. A lot of people wanted to change Volapük, but when Schleyer wouldn't let them, they started going off and designing their own languages based off of it. But that wound up just fracturing the movement. Like, if you wanted to learn Volapük, should you learn the original that the creator has stubbornly refused to change, or pick one of the dozens of improved versions floating around out there? Increasingly, people chose neither, and instead opted to learn a competitor to Volapük. It had been created around the time Volapük was just getting popular by a guy named Ludwig Zamenhof for basically the same reason as Volapük. Zamenhof had seen how different languages had divided the people of his hometown into Russians, Poles, Germans, and Jews, and he wanted to create a common language for everyone to speak. Interestingly, Interestingly, he never actually names the language in the book he published it in. He only ever calls it the international language, and he never names himself either, simply referring to himself as the one who hopes, or in his language, Esperanto. Without something to call it, people decided to just name the language after him, or at least what he called himself. Hence the language of Esperanto was born. If you've heard of an artificial auxiliary language, it's probably Esperanto, and there's a reason for that. At its height in the early 20th century, Esperanto was huge. Both the League of Nations and the UN for a while seriously considered adopting Esperanto. Part of the reason was that Esperanto managed to mostly avoid the fracturing that led to the end of Volapük. Zamenhof was actually really open to the idea of reforming the language, but people had seen what minor disagreements had done to Volapük. Besides, an auxiliary language doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be not obnoxious enough for people to be willing to learn it to communicate with each other. Some people did break off and make Esperanto-inspired rivals like Edo and Interlingua, but there's been an impressive continuous community of Esperanto speakers that's lasted up to today. Nowadays, it's by far the most well-known artificial language, and it's one of only a few to brag that it has native speakers. That's right, more than once, speakers of Esperanto had children and regularly spoke Esperanto in their home, enough so that their child grew up speaking it. Not only that, but one of those children, Kim Henriksen, is currently raising a second-generation native Esperanto speaker. The second reason people create artificial languages is because people just want to improve language. From this point of view, the problem with languages isn't that there's too many of them, it's that all of them suck. People complain all the time about how the way we say things isn't really how things are in the real world, and if you follow this line of reasoning far enough, you inevitably start asking, well, how is the world then, and how should we speak? Pretty soon you're coming up with your own words that perfectly reflect the way things really are in the world, and you've got yourself a philosophical language. Different philosophical languages from different times often reflect the values of the people and cultures that made them. During the Enlightenment era in Europe, there was a little bit of a philosophical language fad. In the era when everyone was talking about the supremacy of human reason, it makes sense to think that we should be able to design our own better languages. One of the most popular was created by John Wilkins, who did his best to take everything in the universe that can be talked about and categorize all of it into one giant hierarchy, and then the sounds for the word for that thing would be determined based on its place in that hierarchy. So an alphabetically organized dictionary for this language would feel like it's sorted according to something like the Dewey Decimal System, with the first sound in a word telling you generally what kind of word it is, and then the next sound getting more specific, and so on. Now, Wilkins put an enormous amount of effort into making the words in his language have reasons for sounding the way they do, but he barely put any effort at all into the grammar of his language. In that respect, morphosyntactically, it was basically just English with a bit of Latin thrown in. But the most popular philosophical language today takes the exact opposite approach. There's an idea in linguistics that I really haven't talked about enough, called the Whorfian hypothesis. It proposes basically that language affects the way we think. There are different versions of the hypothesis that try to narrow down and get really specific about exactly how language influences our thought, but that's the gist of it. Different languages encourage people to think in different ways. In 1960, a man named James Cook Brown proposed a possible test for this hypothesis. If we design a language to be extremely different from all natural languages and try to make it as logical as possible, and then we get a bunch of people to learn it, what would happen to them? Would their behavior and non-language related tasks change? Well, to find out, he created such a language, Loglon. A lot of people really liked this idea of a logic-based language. It never became nearly as popular as Esperanto, but to this day there's a decent community around it. Well, sort of. See, the Loglon community wound up getting into a bit of a similar conflict as the one that happened to Volapük almost 100 years earlier. A lot of the speakers of it wanted to change it, but the guy who made it wanted it to stay the same. Eventually, most of the people interested in Loglon wound up leaving and creating their own language on the same principles as Loglon, called Lojban, which has been managed collectively ever since. Now, let me talk for a second about Loglon and Lojban, because they are basically just the weirdest thing ever. Lojban doesn't care about the sounds of the words, it just based all of its vocabulary off of a handful of existing languages. But it does care about making sure that the interactions between words happen in a consistent, logical way, and in the process, it winds up working in a completely different way from any natural language. Frankly, if someone tried to raise a native Lojban speaker the way people have raised native Esperanto speakers, I'm not sure what would happen. Like, if our brains are hardwired to use language a certain way, which we're not sure if they are, but if they are, in my opinion, Lojban almost definitely falls outside the realm of things our brains evolved to handle. I've learned a little bit, and it doesn't feel like an actual language. It feels like spoken computer code. So yeah, that about sums it up. None of these artificial languages have really taken off or achieved the success they wanted to. Neither Esperanto nor any other artificial auxiliary language has managed to overcome the inertia of people just learning the language of whatever superpower happens to be dominating. And philosophical languages have never really caught on because well, everyone has a different philosophy, and it's a bit hard for people to all speak in a way that truly reflects the world when no one can agree on how the world really is. So, given that both of these reasons for inventing languages are basically doomed from the start, the whole thing seems pretty much like a waste of time to me. Oh, hi, Artifexian.
Wait, hold on. What?
Everyone, I'd like you to meet Artifexian. Last I checked, he was making some cool videos about space and stuff, but I'll admit, it's been a while since I've caught up on his videos. Anyway, what are you doing here?
What do you mean the whole thing is a waste of time? You're leaving out the biggest reason people make artificial languages.
And what would that be?
Fun.
What? Making up a language is a monstrous amount of work. You have to create a phonology and a syntax and create thousands of words of vocabulary. Why would anyone do that for fun?
Okay, let's back it up a bit. So early in J.R.R. Tolkien's life, he became obsessed with Welsh, and later Finnish. He loved the way Welsh looked and sounded, and he loved the way Finnish syntax works. And he started to make up his own language inspired by them. Not just a language either, but a whole family of languages. And then a culture to go along with them. And then a world to put the culture in. The languages he made up became the languages of the elves and the other creatures of Middle-earth. And later he would say that he wrote Lord of the Rings mostly to justify his weird hobby of making up languages.
Okay, but that was just one guy.
Yeah, but he started something. Ever since, loads of fantasy and sci-fi writers have made up their own languages for the universes they create. Let's see, you've got the Na'vi language from Avatar, Dothraki from Game of Thrones, and of course, my personal favourite, Klingon. A gruff, vaguely alien-sounding language spoken by a violent, warlike race from the Star Trek universe. Kapla!
Just when I thought this couldn't get any nerdier.
In fact, I was just about to begin constructing my very own language over on my channel. You should totally come help.
Sorry, but I have better things to do than make up words for your silly pretend language.
You could give people advice on how to construct phonological inventories.
I'm just gonna...
Ah, come on, it'll be fun.
Huh?